Hello Mindfulness Project family. Another video for our Patreon today, and I'm super excited about this theme because it's kind of now we are touching the deepest core of spirituality. So I would like to start with a story, and the story is from the yogic, one of the deepest yogic texts, the Chandogya Upanishad. And it's about a father, and he has a 12-year-old son. And he decided to send his son into the world and learn everything he could ever learn. So the son is very keen to do that. So he went out, and he comes back after 12 years. Then he's 24 years, and, very proud. He comes back to his father and tells him everything about what he have learned, about the stars, about astrology, about medicine, about, spirituality. He has seen doctors and rishis and all the wise men in the country. And the father is amazed and, very proud of his son, but then he asked him one question. And he said, did they also teach you about that which cannot be seen, cannot be heard, cannot be known, yet without it, nothing can ever be seen, heard, or known? And a little bewildered, the son is looking at his father, and he's like, no, I've learned everything I could. And he said, no, what's that? But I'm sure if my teachers would have known about it, they would have told me. Can you tell me about it, sir? And then the father takes him for a very, very incredible teaching. So in the beginning he says, do you see these two clay pots? And so he's holding up two clay pots. And he says, you can see that these two pots are clearly two different pots. There's a duality here. And they're each made of clay. But the essence of the pot is the same. The pots would not exist without the clay. They are totally dependent on the clay for their existence. But yet, what we see is just the pot, the shape, the color, the outside. But the clay remains untouched by the potness. The pot can be this or that shape. It can be colored or broken. But the clay is always the same. By knowing the essence of clay, you know the essence of all things made out of clay. So now, know your own essence. When you know your own essence, you will know the essence of all things. So that is a really, really incredible story, because I think, we've all, have asked ourselves, who am I? What is this existence all about? Why is there so much suffering in the world and all these kind of things? So the main question is, who am I? What am I? And, so the Buddha is teaching that there are basically two realities, the conventional reality and the absolute reality. The conventional reality is the reality of the two pots. It's the same thing I'm always saying. You can look at a map and you see countries and, like France and Germany and Italy. And, when you go to these places, this concept, the duality has a reality to it. So there are different languages, different thoughts, different cultures, different food, and so on. And but when you look from the moon to Europe or something like this, you don't see any borders. So you can see it's just a concept in our mind which we have made up. So these dualities is just something from the mind. It's the same thing with our skin. For us it appears reality. We can poke our fingers into it. But when you go, and take a microscope instead of one solid thing, you see different cells. And if you look deeper, then you see, each cell has, a little bit of matter in the center and then an electron circling around it. And when you then go to quantum physics and you try to find out what is exactly the matter in the cell, then you see it's actually just energy or light, basically. Depends on who is watching the experiment. So, and the Chandogya Upanishad, even though it's 5,000 years old, talks exactly about this conventional reality of body, of matter, and the higher reality, or not say it's not directly higher, it's just kind of another plane of reality. There is the formless, basically, where there is not a duality, where everything just becomes energy and light. So, and for a lot of people, it's really difficult to grasp the absolute reality in their day-to-day life, and we are very much living on our conventional truth. The Buddha was asked, what is actually this essence? What's the essence of, what's the clay of our own existence? And so the Buddha started his journey with the same thing, that, he had everything. He was the son of a king, and he had, the food he wanted, all the distractions he wanted, and but he felt he was not happy. So he was going out, and for his father always tried to protect him from any negative, because he was afraid that by that he would become a spiritual seeker, and he wanted him to become a great emperor and, conquer the world. So the Buddha went out alone, sneaked out of the temple, and with his attendant, he for the first time saw somebody who was old age. For the first time he saw somebody who was ill and somebody who died. And every time he asked his attendant, what is this? This is, a sick person. And he asked, will that happen to me too? And he said, yes, of course. You're human, the dead person, will that happen to me? Yes, it will, because we all have to die. And so that had a deep, deep impact, a kind of shock to the Buddha. And then he realized, wait a second, we are living in a world of dualities. And in everything in this whole universe, if there's left, there must be right. If there is light, there must be shade. If there's up, there must be down. So he thought, when we are living in a world of dualities, if there is disease, then there must be the opposite of it. If there's suffering, there must be the end of suffering. And if there's death, there must be the deathless. And he went out into the world, and he wanted to understand, what is the deathless. He wanted to experience it, and he never stopped before he understood it. And when he got enlightened, one of the teachings he gave afterwards, and I would like to read it to you. Once he was asked, where do the four great elements, the water element, the fire element, the air element, and the earth element, where do they find an end? Where do they just disappear? Because that must be our essence. This is who we really are. And the Buddha said that's a wrong question. Better ask, where do the four great elements don't find any footing? And then he answered himself, and he said, in the awakened consciousness, the invisible, the limitless, and radiant. So that consciousness, which is limitless and invisible, there is it that earth, water, fire, and wind, and long and short, and fine and coarse, pure and impure, no footing find. There it is that both nama, which is our mind, and rupa, which is our body, fade out, leaving no trace behind. When discriminative consciousness comes to its limit, they are held in check therein. Whoa! So we see that the elements will find no footing in enlightened consciousness, and that also all dualities are, disappearing in this enlightened consciousness, And that is the end of all suffering, and that is the element of the deathless. And it's really interesting because you can, open up the Bible and you read the story of Adam and Eve in paradise. And God tells them, you stay in paradise, you stay in the realm of where there's no suffering, where there is the deathless, until you eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Yes, so it's amazing that even the Bible tells you the knowledge of good and bad, of good and evil, is basically the duality which comes in our mind. All the ideas of this is good, this is bad, this is right, this is wrong, this is up, this is down, this is a higher person, this is a lower person. All these dualities are creating all the suffering we have in our minds and hearts. So the suffering of the idea of I'm a good person or I'm not a good person, that is the problem of suffering. And it is really interesting because the Buddha was saying everything what is conditioned, what is man-made, basically, is causing these kind of turbulences in your mind. But there is something which he calls enlightened consciousness, which is not depending on anything. So, for example, I was born in Germany, and I speak with this funny German accent, and I speak mainly German. So, but I was not born with speaking German. I, learned that after my birth. But I was definitely conscious. I came to this planet, and what makes life is basically that you are conscious and conscious of. So the Buddha puts it in different terms to make you understand how you should actually practice, how you should come to the point where, suffering ends. That's our goal, where duality ends, like we read that in the Bible. So how can we come to this place where we come to enlightened consciousness? And actually, the Buddha says it's not as difficult as you think, because a lot of times you become conscious of something. So I'm conscious of what I see, and the Buddha calls it eye consciousness. I become conscious of what I hear. And immediately with all these comes the duality. I like the sound, I don't like the sound, I like the sight or I don't like the sight, and my suffering comes when I see something which I don't like, I hear something, I think something which I don't like. I'm constantly in the bias and in the duality that I want reality different than it is. So, and for meditation, he gave the simile that he said, okay, imagine you have a house and the sun is coming through the eastern window. So he asked the monks, where does the sunlight land? And the monk says, on the western wall, probably. And the Buddha said, yeah, that's right. But imagine there's no wall. Where would the sunlight land? And the monk said, it would probably land on the ground. And when the Buddha said, imagine there's no ground, where would it land? And then the monk said, maybe water? The Buddha said, yeah, right. But if there's no water to land, where does it land? And the monk said it would not land anywhere. So that's again, if there are the the four main forms of existence: the earth, the fire, the air, and the wind. If they are gone, if the sunlight has nothing to land on, it would land on nothing. So he said, consciousness, which doesn't land on anything, which is not grasping and clinging to anything, this is, our essence. This is enlightened consciousness. So if I hear something and I am able to just hear and not go into bias of I like, I don't like, I want this, I don't, if I'm just stay in the present moment, if I detach myself from all dualities and from the dualities of time and space and so forth, then I'm in that enlightened consciousness. So, in our theme, and now I'm just telling you the theme. So, we have been going through the koshas, yeah? So, our body layers who obstruct our pure essence, yeah? And even the bliss, the meditative bliss, is still a layer which obstructs, who you really are, what you really are. And so some people, call it Atman. Some people call it God. Some people call it consciousness. Some people call it the soul, and all these kind of things. But what the Buddha was actually pointing out is then whenever your consciousness lands on anything, like a concept, the concept of God. Some people say, God is in everything and God has ever been. Then you're just narrowing down that which is beyond, the unconditioned, because the unconditioned is never in space. If you say God is in everything, you put him in relation to space. If you say, God has ever been, then you put him into relation to time. But, the whole thing is to keep consciousness not landing on anything. Because everything is just, impermanent. Everything is just, bound to suffering when it's bound to conditions. Yeah, so, and the idea is to allow your mind, if you close your eyes, to not land on a new concept. So, all the isms, even Buddhism, Christianity, these are just concepts who are just important to point out certain things to bring you on the path. But there's a famous saying: if you meet Buddha on the way, kill him. That is just the pure essence of the enlightened consciousness, which is not landing on left or right, up and down. And the implication for your life is that when you close your eyes, your mind is playing the trick of dragging you towards the conventional truth of things, and your mind goes like, oh, I have to, sit down in meditation to come from state A, which is unenlightened, to state B, which is enlightened. So this is your mind creating a concept of meditation, creating a concept of spirituality, which is not true. If you then go like, oh, my pure essence is already, it's already enlightened. I'm, this incredible, pure, radiant being. And it's still the same problem, that your mind is landing on the good and bad thing. If we say, if we use the concept of this is my higher self, then you are in the bias of, there are parts in me which are not so good, and, this is my lower self, and here's my higher self with all my enlightened kind of thing. This is still a me and mine thinking. And what we try to do is to go away from enlightened or non-enlightened. It's just a concept. It's just a duality, and just see the things as they are in the moment appearing. If you're just chasing, after beautiful meditative experiences, then it's me trying to have a certain experience, no matter how great these experiences are. Does that make sense to you? So it's basically, the deepest way of looking into things as they are. If I hear a sound, there's just hearing. There's just that which is conscious of the hearing without any kind of bias, without any kind of duality. And then you are in paradise. Then nothing can ever happen. If you feel hunger, it might be painful, but it's still the thinking of me, mine, ego, and wanting things different than they are. If you are able to open your heart completely to the things how they are, then just suffering cannot have a footing. If there's no duality of good and bad, painful, not painful, if there's no of these duality, then suffering does not find any footings. There's pure acceptance, there's pure joy and bliss, and all these kind of things are coming, but not in the sense of yay, but in the sense of pure equanimity, a balanced mind. And this is what we try to achieve. This is our essence, which is enlightened consciousness. And some people use the picture of, that our mind is like a radio, and consciousness is that radio signal. And, you're just tuned into one single frequency of one radio signal, and this is what you call your personality. But if you are able to, just broaden your mind, then you can receive all the frequencies of what is there without any bias. So, the tasks and the teaching of it, I will do a meditation which is guiding you there. That will come next week, and I hope that you just really dive into it, to practice it every single day, so that you just get a taste of it. Don't think you cannot do it. That's again the duality kind of things. But on the other hand, I would like you to understand that these teachings have a deep impact, because whenever your mind goes back in time to, past childhood traumas or something like this, see that the reality in this moment can be completely unbiased just watching it. So there's this part in you, the conventional level of truth, which has experienced it, which has a name, which has a character, which has certain attributes, and then there is that, absolute reality of you, which, where these things just have no footings, nothing to land on, and no matter what has, happened to you, consciousness is just that which is conscious of what has happened, will happen, and happens in the moment. And that consciousness is not different from me. It is not different to anything. Thich Nhat Hanh calls it interbeing. So, that consciousness is, it just is. And we try to find words and names, and that will limit it again to something smaller. Try to just let the consciousness not land. It's so easy, but it has such a deep impact. So also, when you talk about political concepts, see, it's just duality. Capitalism, communism are just man-made concepts. If you come to the concept of race, that's just in the head of people. There's no black or white or yellow or red or whatever. When it comes to the concepts of man and woman, in the deepest reality, there's no such thing. And if our heart lands in this, what we call unconditioned or emptiness, peanut, Yeah, I have to teach you a little bit. I know you also have such a good heart. So if our heart can really land in this unconditioned, then your heart is free. Then your heart cannot judge anybody, because there's nothing to talk or discuss about. There's no right or wrong way to live. It's just this whole kind of messy life where we can get enlightened to. It's not that if everybody would be enlightened in society, that there's anything different, because there will always be, suffering and impermanence, and, things are falling and people you love will leave, but that's not the point. The point is that your heart can open up to the absolute peace of where no duality finds any footing. Thank you so much for the time and that you listened to that. And I see you next week with this meditation. Thank you.